Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us. I'm Mary Beaton, Head of Residential Sales here at Hamptons, and today we're talking second homes and having the best of both worlds, combining your main residence with a city-based pied-à-terre, a bolt hole in the country, or perhaps a seaside retreat. The way we live our lives has changed enormously over the last year. And so today I'll be joined by a panel of experts to reveal some of the latest trends in the second home world as we move into what will hopefully be a post-lockdown era. We'll be discussing what options you have if you're considering buying or renting a second home, and our experts will reveal some of their top tips. If you have any questions you'd like to put to the panel during the course of the webinar, please use the chat box on the right-hand side of your screen. We should have plenty of time for your questions afterwards, so please do get in touch. And so without further ado, let me introduce our expert panel to you. I'm delighted to be joined by Joanna Cocking, Head of Prime Country House Sales here at Hamptons, Lisa Harvey, our Prime Home Search Consultant, Edward Wayne Heapy, Director of our Horsham branch, and our lettings expert today is Adam Fairweather, Regional Lettings Director covering the home counties and our Western region. So Jo, turning to you first, ever since we emerged from the first lockdown and the housing market reopened last year, we've seen the number of people looking for second homes rise considerably. Just over the last 3 months, we've seen 79% more homes bought by second home buyers than during the same time last year. So what do you think it is that's led to this increase?
Thank you, Mary, and nice to join you all. I think, if I'm honest, I think it's fairly evident that the last year has had an impact on people's house choices, and definitely the move from urban to more country environments to enjoy that space and privacy. I would say it's been noticeable, though, that the advent of the second home option has increased exponentially since the start of this year. And I think that's driven actually in a rather broader sense. I've had clients take houses or apartments up in London as the contrast to the life they're leading in the country, because they see London opening up again. Obviously, mainly it's London looking at the country, but that is a fairly broad reach, and it will go as far as the Cotswolds or somewhere further westwards as it will for the more immediacy and the convenience of the home counties.
Great, thanks, Jo. And Edward, coming to you, do you think the stamp duty holiday has played a role in this? We know anyone buying a second home in the UK has to pay an additional 3% stamp duty surcharge, but they can still save up to £15,000 at the moment, which for those buying in the 500,000 to £1 million price bracket, I assume will still make a big difference for.
It's definitely helped. I think when you look at the market in general, we've had a bit of a boost from that stamp duty saving, but that comes to an end at the end of June. And I think, as Jo said, people are looking at this as more of a lifestyle. So I don't think that this marketplace will suddenly be over. There are people who've had time to consider their lives and what they're doing, and they're interested in making a change. So I think although the stamp duty break has been very, very useful, I don't think it'll be the overriding thing. I don't think there'll be lots of sales for second homes pushing for the end of June. I think they'll all just be, keen to get something done and have their home away from home.
Okay, brilliant. Thanks, Edward. And Lisa, over to you. Are people changing where they have their main residence and therefore reversing the location of their second home?
There's certainly been a shift in the preferred location of a second home. The suburban home used to be the ideal retreat for a London, city dweller after a week at work, probably 45 minutes outside of London, green space, village feel. But people who had that luxury of a suburban home have now found themselves working in that home for the last 12 months. They became schools. We've got desks in rooms we never thought we would have. And so it's much harder to switch off in those homes. So in the prime market, where there's a little bit more money, I'm being asked to look at houses not too far away from their suburban homes, which have now become their places of work. So really there's a trend appearing whereby people don't want to travel for great distances or for a very long time. They just want to be able to switch off in a familiar location that doesn't take them too long to get to. So they want to pack up the children on a Friday, be able to get them back to school on a Monday, but they want to be able to be guaranteed that they can switch off there. So at the moment, I'm seeing London being out of the equation as one of the primary residences, and we're seeing a lot of people let those properties and perhaps leverage against them and say, right, my suburban home is my hub now, we'll work there all week, and let's find a property further out, more in a more rural location where we can switch off.
Okay, great. Thank you, Lisa. Adam, over to you. It seems as though the security of bricks and mortar is of real appeal at the moment. And we've seen buy-to-let investment rise over the last year too. Are many second home buyers entering into it as an investment proposition? And if so, what are their options? Or are these purchases purely being fueled by a personal desire to live further out?
I think it's a great question, and good afternoon, Mary, and good afternoon, everyone. I think when customers mention to us second homes, they're already talking about something that feels a lot more personal than just a pure investment. Although our customers are very savvy, they often go into it looking at both options. And I think the good news is if you're in that position, then we can talk to you about several options about your second home in terms of being able to realize some revenue at the same time as delivering on your perfect outhouse or your perfect bolt hole, as you put it. I think even if you are purely driven just to have a second home and never considering it as an investment, we're really well placed to be able to offer some really good options for you. That could be planning your availability. So when you're going to be resident in that property through the year, we can work around you with short lets, and actually often you find that the income you derive from that can wash the face of any debt on the property through your second home purchase. Even if you're looking at potentially developing something where there might be a protracted extended period of planning or an architectural phase, but there's a property there in situ that's in good order now while you go through that, well, we've got options for long let. So we can actually have somebody in your second home whilst you're putting together the package of what it will look like finally to really deliver some revenue while you're in that planning stage.
Brilliant. Thanks, Adam. So, Joe, I'm going to come back to you with this one. What makes a good second home, and what should prospective buyers be looking for?
Gosh, nice question. I think what makes a good second home, I think it should have a sense of the holiday about it. I think when we all go away, whether it's staying at some lovely cottage in the Lake District or traveling on a plane to somewhere perhaps warmer in the old times, I think it's just an essence of just, I can really put everything down that I would normally do, as Lisa was mentioning, around work environment, schooling, or anything else. And I think generally, what makes a good second home is, I would always say to people, unless you are planning to educate from that second home or in any way be tied to an environment, look at your passions. You know, we get really good traction to our South Coast offices for those who love the water, sailing. I'm equally happy to say that a lot of our Thames side offices do extremely well, both in London and in the country, because again, water is a big pull for tranquility. So anywhere with a lake or a piece of water or a view. And generally, I would say the advent of everybody either being a dog owner or becoming a dog owner in the last year, we've seen a huge uptick in those who just love the idea of walking from their front door out into that environment, and whether that's on foot or on bikes. Just to have a real contrast to what they're doing otherwise on their day-to-day lives.
Okay, brilliant. Certainly true about that dog ownership. I'm going to put Adam and Joe on the spot with this one. So there are obviously lots of ways to fulfill these second home dreams, but ultimately, is it best to buy or rent your second home? What are the advantages and disadvantages of both? Adam, I'll come to you first on that one. Oh, no, ladies first. Joe, over to you.
It's fine. Sorry, Adam. I think there's a benefit to both. I'm a huge fan of the try before you buy, as we call it. I think if you are new to the country environment, you don't necessarily know where you want to buy that second home. I would be very much advocating taking the opportunity of dry running it. And that's a bit more than just going for a nice weekend away. We've seen plenty of anecdotal evidence where people have rushed off to buy homes in holiday spots they've enjoyed with the children for 2 weeks in 1 year, only to find that the rest of the year is nothing like as fun as they thought it would be. So I think the fact that we're really well placed to offer short let opportunities uniquely in the country, actually at Hamptons, we offer that. And we do encourage a lot of our sellers to consider that. I certainly in the prime department, we see cases where we have some phenomenal offers of tenancies. And indeed, we've recently taken up a very high net worth let on a house that we could have sold, but the seller has decided that to take the intermediate income. Now, of course, the question mark is still that tenant may well become our buyer. They haven't said they will definitely do it, but they have indicated that in taking such an enhanced rental to take it out of the sales market at the moment, they do want that right and option to perhaps consider buying it at the conclusion of the tenancy. So I think it's a good angle to consider unless you're absolutely certain you've done your research and you have an absolute commitment to an area.
Great, thanks, Jo. Adam?
Yeah, look, well, building exactly on what Jo said, I would say that getting to know somewhere, getting to know not only the geography, but also the local community is really, really important. So the try before you buy, the putting your toe in the water, seeing what it's like having that country home through a rental model is really advantageous. I think in the long term, however, I would advocate a purchase. A second home often means, as I've said, there's going to be protracted periods of time where the property doesn't have anyone in it. And if you are renting that second home, that's not the most efficient use of your money. Because, of course, turn that on the head. If you own that property, those empty periods, those void periods where you aren't going to be using it throughout the year, they can actually become income generators for you. So I think once you've tried, once you know that the beautiful area you want to live in is absolutely right for you, I definitely recommend a purchase.
Brilliant. Thanks, Adam. Now, Lisa, you mentioned the distance that a purchaser or a buyer is prepared to travel. Our research shows that the average second home buyer buys a property around 46 miles away, but that Londoners are prepared to look that little bit further, heading 83 miles on average. So tell us, what are the most popular destinations for second home buyers?
Do you know, it's really hard to pinpoint because there's not just one or two. I think because we've all been so restricted in the last 12 months. I work in an area way, so I look at all of our region's movement, and there isn't one green county that hasn't experienced a huge surge in movement, in sales, in people just looking to move on. And I think it's because everybody spent 12 months being locked down, and they've taken a real close look at their life and they're sort of considering their options. And I think the pandemic brought with it a feeling of, let's just give it a go. Life's short, let's live that dream. And I think you mentioned, people seeking that country idyll, saying, yes, I'm ready to have, that little country cottage, or yes, let's get that place by the sea. So, to name drop a few, the Cotswolds is extremely popular because of its chocolate box cottages. Kent coast, Sussex coast, all of the southern coast, but people are just going for it at the moment. There's movement in all of our green counties because I think people are just ready to just get out there, and that's really exciting to be a part of.
Definitely. Thanks, Lisa. So how are people financing these? Edward, tell us, how do most people finance these second homes, and what are the taxes and costs that buyers need to consider?
Okay. It's an interesting one because most of our buyers appear to be cash, but whether they're actually true cash, probably a split. I think we see a good number of those that have actually remortgaged their existing home and put that money together with their savings to come out and buy something. Good news is Hamptons has really, really excellent brokers. So if anyone wants any advice on that, you're more than welcome to make contact with us and we can put you in touch with the right people. In terms of costs, we've touched on it already. Stamp duty is the biggest one, particularly with the extra 3% on purchases for second homes. You've obviously got your normal costs, solicitors' costs, removals if you're moving any of your own furniture down, those sorts of typical buying costs. The beauty, I suppose, though, of a second home is that actually over an extended period of time, it's likely to increase in value. So unlike a holiday that we all enjoy, where you've spent it and you've had a great time, but that money's just lost, the beauty of a second home is that actually, hopefully, over a period of time, it's going to have gone up in value. But we've got to remember that there is likely a capital gains tax liability at the end of that ownership. So there's a little bit to pay on the way out, perhaps, but hopefully offset by actually likely rising prices.
Brilliant. Thanks, Edward. And just saying on that sort of investment theme, Adam, what should you consider if you're planning on buying a second home to let out? Is there a trade-off between profit and pleasure, or are there places where both can work?
Well, happily, that's probably the most common question that we're asked. And it's always nice to give a positive answer in that there isn't really a huge trade-off. And even if your requirements for your second home are quite niche, we're in a good place, and we're often very capable of finding tenants, long or short, that mirror your own needs for a property. So from that point of view, if you are looking for a second home that is also going to be a good investment, do let the second home, your pleasure, guide and lead that. And if there's a bit of hard work to do, let it be us that does it. I think any sort of investment, location is obviously key. Do think about the places that other people will want to go as well, and coastal locations, the Cotswolds, the Downs, the Wealds, all of which are really, really popular. So that shouldn't be too much of a concern. Condition is also important. What, if anything, you are prepared to do? Family homes are pervasively popular at the moment. And again, all of these things lend themselves very easily to often what you're looking for is your second home. So it's not too much of a challenge. I think a modern finish would be ideal, but it doesn't have to be that. So do think if you wanted to add value and improve the condition of a property, that doesn't preclude it from being a good rental investment in the short or medium term whilst you're not using that second home.
Brilliant, great advice. Thank you, Adam. Lisa, coming back to you. So if you're buying or renting a pied-à-terre in London, that must be quite different to buying a second or renting a second home in the country. So where and what should our audience consider if they're thinking about their second home being in the capital?
Well, more often than not, you said it, it's a pied-à-terre, it's something for occasional use. So it's somewhere that you're going to use after a day in the city, perhaps having entertained clients, or perhaps you're going to come into it from the country to spend the weekend there. But really, you've got to consider making it as maintenance-free and as hassle-free as possible. So you don't want to come in after 6 weeks to find that you've had a leak. So my advice would be, although I love older style properties, I'd probably go for a new build and go for as newer luxury development as you can afford. And probably just keep it simple. Maybe choose a lateral apartment. You won't use a garden, and it's probably safer while you're not there that it is higher up. And if you do choose a luxury apartment, you'll probably get concierge service and security, which will be an added benefit whilst you're not there. So you know there's somebody keeping an eye on it. You may even get the luxury of having residents' leisure facilities, which would be a boon. But most importantly, with a new development, with certainly the luxury developments, you will get a parking space. And I think if you're considering a bolt hole in London, a parking space would be fantastic because they're gold dust. And when you do go in, if it is occasionally, you'll want to take in more than you can carry. So ideal that you could pack up your car, park it safely at no extra cost, and then have it ready and waiting for you for when you want to go home. So for me, your lock up and leave is what you're looking for.
Great advice, thanks, Lisa. Especially that parking, you're absolutely right. Mm-hmm. And then going to the other end of the spectrum, you've moved into the deepest, darkest rural countryside. Joe, coming to you, how or do you have any tips on how people moving into that sort of area can integrate into the local community?
Yeah, sure. I mean, traditionally, obviously, the country move very often was aligned to it becoming the primary residence. So I always say school gates is by far and away the most impactful way of integrating into a community. But I think if it is a second home, I would, by extension of that, look out for the school fete, look out for the school firework display. They're very often public events. Most of these schools have brilliantly animated PTAs who like to raise additional funds, and that's not necessarily, excluding people outside of the school. So that's a really nice way of just getting out and about to meet people. I refer back to our beloved dog owners again. I think just being out and about with a dog, it's a great icebreaker. It's an opportunity to stop and chat, as the dogs will invariably stop and chat. And I think obviously very often those walks are harnessed around maybe trips to a local farm shop or even into the village to pick up the pint of milk or the newspaper or whatever it might be. So most of these villages really appreciate people who are new and do love the idea of somebody stopping for a bit of a chat or asking them for some local advice, or where is the best place to go to for, or, we fancied a takeaway tonight. What do you think? And I think it's the fabric of that we are actually, despite our reputation, not as reserved as you might imagine. And certainly as a Londoner who moved to her village now some 20 years ago, I know that apart from the school, I just found, just by being friendly and being out and about, and certainly in my case, because I do attend my local church when I can, that was also a key part of me being welcomed into the local community. And really anything that I offered to do, whether it was to make the tea or coffee or help with the little ones, was just hugely appreciated, because so many of these villages' demographics sometimes are an older population, and they love the idea of new families coming in and starting the journey that they probably started themselves, many decades ago. And as I say, generally it's a very, very open-armed response.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you, Jo. So before we go to questions, I just want to talk a little bit about what's happening in today's market. A lack of stock has meant a record 1 in 3 buyers finding themselves competing with more than 2 other buyers. And a record 32% of homes are selling above their asking price. I'm sure there are some people watching today who found themselves in this situation, or might even be in it now. So I'm going to come to all of you now. What is your one top tip for people bidding on a home that they want to buy or rent to secure it?
I'm happy to take this one first, Mary. My one's a bit left field. I think it's really nice if buyers don't put their poker face on. If you come to the house and you really like it, tell us you really like it. Clients don't always choose based on exactly the last £1,000 or whatever of the bids. What they love is that someone's really keen on their house. So my top tip is forget the poker face. If you love it, let us know you love it. We can tell the client. They'll probably want you to have it more than anyone else at that point. So that's my slightly left field top tip.
That's a great piece of advice. Thanks, Edward.
I'll
like
follow on for there. Look, I firstly, I'd completely ascribe to what Ed said as well. From a lettings point of view, actually just telling us how keen you are about the property really does help. From a landlord's perspective, if you're hearing that a tenant is particularly keen about living that location, they're already starting to feel that warm, comfortable sense that they've got the right person who'll look after their investment, which may be their important second home. So that's really, really key. From a tenant's point of view, do consider your family makeup and your position. If you do have, and as Joe's already mentioned, pets in the family, and if you do have children, well, there will be more wear and tear. Most landlords are not averse to that, but it does mean that if you are competing for that property with someone that is a couple or a single, then actually you probably need to recognise the wear and tear that property will face in your offer. That can, of course, be how much rent you're offering, but it can be lots of other mechanisms as well. I think don't be fixated on the asking price of a property. Think about what it is worth to you and put your best foot forward and make that offer that you're comfortable with.
Brilliant.
Definitely.
Thanks,
and I think I would add to what Edward was saying, actually. I think where we are seeing, not in every case, but I think where we are seeing sealed bids or at least very least competitive bidding, is as you say, other than just dropping the poker face, I think try not to get too hung up on what others might be bidding to secure it, particularly if bids have already gone to the guide and therefore the bidding is expected to go over the guide. Genuinely take a long, hard look at, if I hear it was sold for a penny more than that, then that's fine because we couldn't have afforded it. That's my first point. And my second point, backing up the emotional side of it, is that I've known of deals being agreed recently where actually it was because one of the 2 buyers actually was hugely animated and offered the same day they viewed it, that actually counted for something with the seller. And although the other buyer, who, to be fair to them, had been doing a lot of due diligence and had been getting architects around and builders and were pacing their thoughts around the property, actually ended up offering more than the other buyer. In the end, my client chose the buyer who offered the same day because, as she said to me, they absolutely responded as I did when I first saw the house. And when we bought it, we weren't actually the highest offer, but it was our drive and actually our family dynamic that we spoke so passionately about wanting to raise our family there that actually came our way. So I just feel this is history repeating itself.
Brilliant. Thanks,
Yeah,
Jo.
and
Lisa,
I would say you've got to ask yourself how much you're prepared to lose the property for. What's the figure that makes you say, if you heard it had sold for a particular amount, you'd think, well, I'd never have paid that for it. The figure underneath that is where you need to be, because then if you lose it there, you'll know that you didn't have a penny more, and that's fine. But you've got to get to that figure, you've got to say to yourself, well, look, am I going to end up renting for the next year? In which case that's going to cost me X. Am I going to end up buying something 3 months down the line that I like far less than this house? Am I going to live in it for the next 7 to 10 years? And if the answer is yes, then it's highly likely the several thousand or a couple of tens of thousands, you won't lose out in the long run. So find that figure that makes you feel that's my cut-off point. That's your line in the sand drawn.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you all. Right, well, we've got some questions. We've actually even had some questions before we'd started the session. So our audience obviously very keen to pick your brains, our panel of experts. So I'm going to go to some questions now. And a reminder to those of you in the audience, if you have got questions, please do fill them in the chat box to the right of your screen, and they'll come through to me. These are a couple of questions from before we started. Adam, this one's one for you. Which properties should this person consider for good holiday rental income?
Thanks, Mary. Look, I think that the places we've mentioned already, I mean, coastal towns are pervasively popular. That view of water that Jo already mentioned will always see you through. But again, the Cotswolds, the Chilterns, the Downs, the Weald, these locations are going to be pervasively popular. Going on from there, I do think it's worth considering locations that can be easily reached, also potentially easily reached by train, often from London. Places even a bit further afield, Bath, Brighton, Oxford, all great places for people aspire to go and visit for a weekend or a little bit longer, particularly at the moment. I think with a holiday let, you do have to consider how much work's going to be involved. So a degree of proximity to your own location is quite sensible, because sometimes holiday lets need to be a bit more hands-on, so we speak. There can be quite a lot of work involved. So do your homework around holiday letting, and also do look at the alternatives. We're working with a lot of clients who are very surprised about the amount of revenue a short let can earn. And so it's not a number of days or up to a week, it's several weeks or a couple of months. Revenue can be very, very similar to that of holiday lets. And of course, when you have one tenant for that protracted period of time, naturally there's a lot less work involved. So hopefully that's, without taking the rest of the time up, hopefully that gives you a couple of ideas.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Adam. There's a lovely, hopeful one here. If I was to buy internationally, where are the warmest summer spots? Lisa, can you take that one for us?
Oh, there are so many lovely, sunny, warm spots to consider if you're looking for a second home outside of the UK. We do have a dedicated international team, so I think it's probably best if they answer that to you directly. So if we can perhaps get your details and I can have one of that team contact you personally after the show, that would be your best bet.
Brilliant. Thanks, Lisa. Jo, this one's got your name on it. Which are the best counties to consider when buying a second home?
Oh, that's a bit sensitive. I have natural bias as an ex-Dorset girl myself, but I live in Buckinghamshire now, which I love equally as much. I think, no, without being too flippant, I think, if I'm honest, the most popular counties are what suits those individuals. I think we are quite lucky, being a relatively small island, that most places are easily accessible. I think for second homes, there's probably a preference for the south and southeast, which of course we're very well placed to help cover those searches. But if somebody is coming to me for a second home, I generally start with, what are your passions? What are your needs for your children? And what is the optimum distance you want to drive on a Friday evening? Because I think as the world, hopefully, and indeed the UK specifically, returns to a sense of a little more normality work-wise, and children are now back in classrooms, you do want to think about that Friday night drive once the children are broken up, because I think you just don't want to be in the car for endless hours on a motorway. So the county choices will tend to be, where are you starting from? What are your passions and interests, in terms of sport or any other environmental choices? And on top of that, is there any longer term thought about possibly making it your primary home, in which case that can sometimes lead again back to the work connectivity?
Yeah, brilliant. Thanks, Jo. This one is for you, Adam. We have a second home in a lake district that we've been using for pleasure, but would now like to let out. Is it better to use a company to rent it through or via Airbnb?
Well, I think that's a really interesting question, and it's a place that a lot of people are finding themselves in at the moment. I think it depends where you are yourself. If you are quite proximate to it, it does mean that you can be more involved. And I think Airbnb often, as a web platform, is great at introducing people for holiday lets, but you may therefore find that the actual operational, practical elements of having it cleaned and welcoming the guests, it falls more on your shoulders. I think if you are looking for something that is, like many of our clients, looking for something that generates a revenue, but they're quite time poor, and this wouldn't be the way that they would choose to spend the time that they have, employing a company, an agency, or someone that manages your property really effectively and efficiently is a great way to go.
Great, thanks, Adam. Edward, this one's got your name written all over it. Edward's the King of Sussex. I've just bought my first home in London, but at home I'm a country girl and looking to buy a second home in Sussex in the next 4 years. Do you have any advice or anything I should bear in mind?
I suppose it depends what this lady wants from it. Lady or chap? I'm not sure what you said now. And where in Sussex? It's such a diverse county. Do they want to be at the seaside in Chichester or Brighton? Do they want to be in mid Sussex? There's so many options. So it's a bit of an open question, that. And do they want village? Do they want smaller town? It's almost too open to answer. Sussex is luckily full of lovely places, so there aren't too many things to avoid. I think it's quite an open book, actually.
Brilliant. Okay. And in the timescale was in the next 4 years. So specifically around that timescale, is there any advice that you'd have around when the best time between now and then might be to do that?
Again, super tricky. I mean, at the moment, it is a very, very buoyant market. I think expectations are that prices could go up a little further in the short term. It depends whether this person has the funds for it now. If I had the funds for it now, I'd probably buy it now, frankly, rather than wait any longer. It feels like we're on a slight upward trajectory at the moment, and I'd probably get in now, frankly.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you very much indeed. I think that that's all the time we've got for questions at the moment. But just important for the audience to know that any other questions, we're obviously here to help you anytime at Hamptons with hundreds of experts, as well as the 4 fantastic experts on our panel here. We will be sending sending our contact details to you in a communication after the session. So yes, please do get in touch if you have further questions. But with that, all remains to be said is a big thank you to our Hamptons panel, Joanna Cocking, Adam Fairweather, Edward Wayne Heapy and Lisa Harvey, and not least a huge thank you to all of you for watching. There's lots more coming up. Do enjoy the rest of the afternoon. Thank you and goodbye.
All right.